Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to SM Advanced Forum, your monthly roundup of streaming news and industry views from experts and, well, I don't know if we're all experts, but certainly witnesses to the evolution of the streaming industry. My name's Dom Robinson, and as always, I am joined by my erstwhile hosts. Let me see if I can actually press the new buttons because, as you'll probably notice, we've got slightly prettier streaming this month. But we have, as always, I'm joined by my erstwhile host, Tim Siglin. Tim, are you out there?
If I unmute my microphone, I am.
Hurrah!
Now I
How are you, Tim?
am doing well. Mark had warned us at the top of the hour to, for everybody to mute, especially because Eric was talking about doing dishes or something. So, Eric, how's life in Wisconsin?
Well, the dishes are apparently, well, we'll see after I'm done with this if the dishes got done. First day of summer vacation here, so it's
Oh, is it really? That's right. I forgot school gets out later for you up there in
Yep.
the north. Nice. And Mark out on the Mark E out on the West Coast because we have two Marks here. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing well. It's June gloom outside. It's definitely not sunny Southern California today, but things are good. Things are good.
Been staying busy?
Busier than a cat trying to cover up a turd on a marble floor, my friend. Yeah, we have 24 live events in June, which is about twice the amount we have
24?
normally. So
Bloody hell.
And
Yeah.
and how many of those are weddings? Because June is the traditional wedding month for a live event videographer.
Right. Yeah. Zero weddings, unfortunately. I've managed to escape having to shoot live weddings.
Yeah, I went back and watched that music video that Maroon 5 did where they went around LA to all the weddings. That was a couple years ago when they did Sugar. That was actually a pretty cool video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool concept.
Anyway, so Eric, what have you been doing besides prepping for the beginning of summer school?
Was in Oslo a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, for Northern Waves, which is a one-day event that Norwegian Media puts on. Other than that, getting the July-August issue of Streaming Media Magazine into our designers' hands and starting to program Streaming Media West, which I think we'll talk about a little later.
Sounds good. Dom, what about you? What have you been up to? And then I'll let you segue into the lovely tag for our guests.
Perfect. So yeah, no, I felt like on Tuesday I finally reached the top of a to-do list, which I've had that was only growing until about 3 weeks ago. I think I had 2 weekend days in 6 weeks or something. So I have been. Well, I tried to relax and chill out, but then I had to go and do a day's consulting, helping up a local council while up there webcasting. It's interesting to see how that space has evolved over 10 years because the kit they've got in there is 10 years old and very clunky. And I've actually suggested they do something not dissimilar to what I'm doing with SMAF here, just because they needed to save some budgets and really they were spending 80% of their effort on producing video, which was adding about 10% value to what they were trying to do. So anyway, we can talk about.
Didn't you also do a music festival here in the last couple of weeks?
I did indeed. Well remembered. I spent 4 days in a field doing a webcast and DJing 4 times, and unbelievably.
Well, it was called Elderflower Fields, but I wondered if that was just like we say in America, you're living in such and such mountain point, and really it's a valley in between concrete barriers. So it really was a field?
No, it was actually. If you've seen the Christopher Robin film, it was the place where that's set because it's where A.A. Milne wrote most of the Winnie the Pooh stories. It's a beautiful rolling landscape, which is normally an MOD base. And well, somebody known to most of you, the illustrious Tim Thompson, who has taken me drinking and fishing and camping down there on a few occasions because they let out just about 100 annual fishing passes down there, and it is a bit bizarre in the middle of the night when you're waiting for a carp to bite, and a squadron of squaddies crawls out of the bushes firing blanks, and then an Apache flies over, and then it all disappears again 5 minutes later. It is quite unnerving. So yeah,
sounds like a normal day in Los Angeles for Mark.
Yeah.
I mean,
Excellent. Anyway, enough about me, Tim. Let me tag us in, and then we'll take you on to the next section. If I can press the right button, that is.
Stacie, did I say your last name correctly?
You did. I can almost hear the French accent.
I worked near La Défense for a brief period of time.
Oh, okay. I'm really near La Défense.
Okay, very good. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So well, I'll tell you where I work because it's brand new. I just started a new job about 2 months ago. So I'm at a company called OpenIO, and we do object storage. So this is a little bit outside of the streaming media area, but we do have some media customers. But I've been in streaming media for, I don't know, well, in media in general for about a bit over 15 years. So before this, I was working with a company that does cloud DVR and OTT. And before that, I was working with another company that does OVPs. And before that, I was working with DRM and conditional access and set-top boxes. So I've had a lot of experience with different parts in this industry.
And where the set-top boxes, was that like an Amino or a Scientific Atlanta?
No, it was Philips actually, way back before Philips got bought by Pace. So yeah, it was Philips set-top boxes.
Interesting. I worked on a framework package 6 project with Philips, probably 03, 04 timeframe when they were exploring some of that.
Okay. Yeah, I was there then. I was at Philips, I think from 03 to 08 or 09, somewhere around then.
That was my only visit to Eindhoven. And what's funny, I had a Sony video camera with me that I was interviewing some of the execs, and somebody knocked it over by accident. Anyway, long story. We won't go into that. But so object-based storage, so that could be things like HLS segments or file assets for video.
Yeah, sure.
Much bigger than just the streaming industry, as you said.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we do have, well, like I mentioned, we are working with video because video is, great for this kind of storage. But we're also really focused at the moment on big data. There are a lot of applications for big data, artificial intelligence. It also works really well with object storage.
Now, some of the companies, like I think Cloudian's one of the companies in that space, they will sort of say, don't use Azure, don't use AWS, use us. Do the solutions ride on those larger cloud storage, or is it that you own the cloud storage and then just parse it out to your customers?
You can do both. I mean, there are connectors that can connect to AWS or Google Cloud. So if that's what a company wants to do, they can do that. But they can also have their on-premise solution, and store in their own data centers if they want.
And is that somewhat akin to ECDNs, or is it sort of a complementary technology to an ECDN?
I would call it complementary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much. That's quite interesting. Now we have the other Mark. And Mark, I did the French part, so I'm just De Jong.
De Jong. Yeah, that's
right.
Easy.
Yeah. And are you still based in Groningen, up in the
Not
north?
in Groningen. No, I live 40 kilometers north of Amsterdam, actually.
Okay.
It's pretty close to the airport, which is very convenient for me, at least.
Yeah, sure, definitely. All right. Well, I remember when you were doing work with Steph, and
yes,
that was Streams.
That was in Groningen.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you doing these days then?
So I've been with Deutsche Telekom for almost 6 years now, handing up their CDN activities on the commercial side primarily for the whole group, basically.
Interesting. And how long have you been in the space? You've been at least 10, 15 years.
Oh, I know Dom for quite a while already. I think I've been on the mailing list for SMAF actually way back in the beginning.
You were indeed. That's how we met, I think.
Yeah, the old mailing lists. So I've been in online video more than 15 years now in total.
Nice.
CDN space, like roughly 10.
And I remember a couple of years ago there was this whole discussion in Europe about federated CDNs, and in fact, you I think, were part of those comments.
I've been in the whole IETF part.
Are we losing?
Yeah,
we may have lost him.
Oop.
No,
Yep,
he's
I'm
back
back.
now.
Sorry.
He's back, yeah.
Okay. No, you were pulling memories from the past and it froze. So you were.
Yeah. So ETSI and IETF have been involved for standardization for CDN Federation, or CDNI as they called it. And I mean, technically, all could work well, but commercially there was no sense in doing CDN Federation in the way they envisioned it.
And remind me, what was the difference between sort of CDN peering and CDN Federation? Because in Europe, it seemed to have a bit of a different take than here in the States.
I mean, peering is purely on the network level. That's basically what's happening right now, right? PNIs, peerings, all that kind of stuff. It's just purely network connectivity that's being connected, right? Where CDN Federation and CDNI were really focused about handing over content from network to network. So instead of caching it in one location in a super pop or whatever for CDN, and then connecting it to the different ISPs, you would then basically, the ISP would have their own CDN, and they would basically do a handover for content from one network to the other, and have a mechanism for this, including things like billing and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to pause here for a quick second, and I think we're going to throw the next tag through.
Picks from the industry section then, chaps. Tim, do you want to lead us away?
Yeah, actually, I want to sort of follow on to what we were talking with Mark there for just a second and have Eric mention at Northern Waves, you said there was some discussion. Eric, first of all, talk about what Northern Waves was, and then the discussion around sort of the centralized models.
Yeah, so Northern Waves is an event in Oslo. It was in its second year this year. It's the third event of its kind in the Nordics. There's an event called the Nordic TV Summit that I believe will be celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, that really focuses on the business side of online video and OTT. There's an event called Streaming Tech Sweden, I believe, in Stockholm, that focuses exclusively on technology. And then there is this newer event, Northern Waves, that tries to bridge the gap. The morning is all tech sessions, and the afternoon is all business and content focused sessions. So this was its second year, gets about 100 people attending. And I moderated the morning last year and this year. And this year there was a panel discussion. Well, first there was a presentation called Nordic Pay TV Collaboration. And Henke Eriksson from Canal Digital, as they say it there. I never know if I'm supposed to say it the way they say it or the way I would say it, which is Canal Digital, which doesn't sound nearly so cool. But essentially proposing that telcos, broadcasters, streaming services, pay TV operators find ways that they can reduce the duplication of costs and technology for things like encoding, transcoding, and storage. Essentially saying, look, if the same piece of content is going to be delivered by multiple services, why not just encode and store it once and then deliver it to each service? For an analogy, he used the airline industry. He talked about the fact that there was a time when each airline had its own baggage handlers, its own catering, but eventually they realized it made more sense to contract those services out. And so that's what we get at airports today. So there actually does seem to be some movement towards this happening. Henke sent a letter out to all the major operators again and pay TV services, telcos and broadcasters, proposing this, and it seems to be gaining some traction. And I was pondering whether or not a model like that can have success elsewhere. We don't know if it's going to have success there yet, but Tim, when we were talking about this before we went on the air, you said that this was actually somewhat similar to the concept of encoding bureaus that existed at the height of the DVD era.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I think what's interesting here is when you think about the DVD era, you had the actual content itself, which was in a master, and you tended to have the studios control what the quality output looked like for the DVD, and of course, at that point, they would go through and encode it in MPEG-2, and they would have people do quality control on it. That same content was then duplicated at multiple duplication houses around the world, some of which had, would do it with a single language, others of which would do it with multiple languages. And part of what I was positing is if the video was encoded once and at multiple levels on a bitrate ladder, late binding, which is one of the concepts that we've sort of come to in the industry as we've gotten to fragmented MP4, would allow us to add the audio later. And I think, Dom, you even mentioned the idea of ad insertion, because I think ad insertion to me would be the one place that if you're really looking to localize, you might potentially run into issues. But I'm assuming there would be some ways to sort of do that with consistent encoding of commercials as well.
Yeah, we'd look at late binding as anything done particularly specifically as you create a manifest for an individual. So
and
otherwise it's manifest control.
Similar to stitching at some level, but you're essentially saying late binding would be the audio and the playlist, so to speak.
Yeah, so we use it for DAZN's, a lot of DAZN's multilingual and NASDAQ's multilingual stuff. We pick out, cherry pick out from, I don't know, up to a dozen, maybe more different language feeds, and depending on where that's being fed to for specific users, they can almost pick and choose their language as they go, and that would be very much a late binding strategy from our point of view.
And then from an object storage standpoint, it's interesting because if you essentially did the encode and licensed it out to particular OVPs or OTT providers, then it becomes a storage and delivery of those objects. An issue there, I would assume, Stacie, is that if somebody needs to replicate it to multiple locations, that would be a similar model.
Oh yeah, definitely. It would definitely work.
But wouldn't that really work in Europe? Because every country has its own language. Some dub, some do subtitling. Some have specific rights in what content they can or cannot show in terms of scenes. So even if you would do that, it would still be specified for one single country. You can do like Europe-wide or something.
But I guess, Mark, here's my question on that. I agree, it's different languages, subtitling, overdubs, etc. The audio is individual assets from the video. If the video was encoded in a single, say you had 15 bit rates on a bitrate ladder, and OVPs or OTT providers could choose, if they license those, they may license up to a certain level, 720p, 1080p, etc. Would there be, to me, the question would be more, are there network disparities that would cause sort of a single bitrate ladder to be jettisoned by different countries around Europe versus the audio? Because the audio SAP, we dealt with that years ago in the satellite space, and late binding essentially allows us to solve that technical problem. The network, to me, would almost be the biggest potential limitation.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think it is just manifest manipulation. If you want this advert and this audio for that advert, and then to segue into a live stream and so on, I think that's all part and parcel of the same thing. I just want to interrupt a second. We've had a comment in from the chat room from, forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, Loki Dupont, who's mentioned it would seem like a shared live stream across operators would also make live ad replacement easier, as it could be done by the content owner, but then used by all the distributors. So that's quite an interesting comment there.
Basically, what that is satellite distribution to cable operators. At least in the States, that's how that works. It was pushed up the satellite. Everybody brought it down and then inserted their own ads with a local ad insertion tool.
Kind of the raison d'etre for Scotty 35, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So Eric, is that, I mean, obviously with Canal pushing that type of thing, they're a fairly big player in content in Europe. Is your sense that that's something that will be looked at, or is it just, hey, let's throw this idea out there, sort of like Federation of CDNs, and then nobody really sort of moves forward with the idea?
No, my sense is that it actually is going to be given some serious thought. Discovery Norway, Tina Jensen, the CEO, was on this panel. Jessica Anderson from ComHem, Jerome Sederval from Reeks TV, and Marius. I'm looking at the picture right now to see who was on the panel. Refresh my memory.
I was like, yeah, that's an impressive memory if you got all this.
No. And Telia is also on board, at least, to have serious discussions about it. So whether it'll actually happen, I don't know, but they all seem fairly confident that a year from now, at the next Northern Waves, that there would actually be something to talk about.
Hey, Marky, so you don't obviously do encoding with Disney or Marvel or anything, but you work with those companies on a number of live events. When we're looking at this aggregation of content that Disney's doing, with Marvel and Star Wars and all the Disney content, they have in the past with DVDs, had really tight control over what the quality looked like when they did the encodes. Would you see that as a potential model for them as well, especially as they're launching their own streaming service? They say, hey, we've got it at what we think is the optimal encoding. And then if they start sub-licensing it out to other providers, other OTT platforms, that they would say you'd have to use our encodes to keep it at a particular quality level.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that that's how the Disney organization works in terms of content creation, mastering, that sort of thing, that it's all centralized for all of their products. It remains to be seen whether that's going to now extend to all of the Fox properties and that sort of thing, and which will get wrapped into which. But it does bring up the question I was going to ask Eric is, as you were talking about this at the show, did you get an idea of whether or not these content creators were not wanting to innovate based on, technology? Like, do none of them, offer, or are none of them looking to offer, let's say, HDR encoding as a competitive advantage moving forward? It seems like that would kind of put the kibosh on anyone being able to innovate, right?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly came up, although, there was agreement that at this point, none of them felt like 4K or HDR were offered enough of a premium for people to pay extra for, or to differentiate their services with. So it doesn't seem to be too much of a holdup. I mean, one of the themes that came up again in a couple of different speakers was, sort of buy everything you can and build only when it makes sense. And so, I don't think there's the premium placed on technological innovation that perhaps we are accustomed to. Again, small market, perhaps smaller margins, and so looking for ways to cut and or share costs whenever possible, I think, is the impulse behind it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in terms of market cap, like for some of these, companies, I wonder if it's only possible because of the small market. I don't think something like that would work. A bureauized, encoding farm would work in the U.S. market for sure, because it's all about innovation here, even if it's just, metadata or what's being, embedded in the content to be shared out in a proprietary app. Everything's about competitive advantage. So I would think that probably wouldn't fly here, but
it's still kind of interesting, I think, to see the collaboration. And I wonder if, the fact that they are collaborating will no one will have a competitive edge, but will they be able to go further faster, since they've got, all these different companies working on it, all these different resources? It could work out in their favor.
Well, that's a theme that's come up numerous times here on SMAF, right? I don't know if it's come up the last couple of episodes that I've missed, but sort of the on one hand, the broadcast model that puts a premium on standardization at the expense of innovation, but that allows the industry as a whole to perhaps move forward more quickly, as opposed to the Silicon Valley emphasis on innovation that, as Mark was saying, puts the focus on competitive advantage, but at the same time, it has everybody reinventing the wheel every 2 years.
And let me segue off of that into innovation in Silicon Valley, because WWDC, the Worldwide Developers Conference for Apple, was this last week. And I think one of the topics somebody wanted to talk about off the Flipboard was video editing and photos. And I'm assuming this is based around the tools that Apple is now taking from a filter standpoint that were there for still images and applying those to videos. Who had suggested that topic?
I think I suggested the topic, and Mark had some insights on the video editing in the iPhotos. Mark,
I think we were just chatting about it briefly before the show. All they've done is taken the elementary video editing capabilities, the timeline capabilities out of iMovie and moved them into the Photos app. It's a non-story. they just made it slightly easier to edit video, which will be great. I mean, but that's really all that came out of WWDC in terms of video.
So in that case, that's not really innovation. That's just repackaging and making it look a little better. Interesting.
Just shuffled some things around.
It was a strange WWDC in terms of the press response, I thought. I mean, the announcement about iTunes seemed to light everyone up. A big topic, but it was a meaningless announcement. The separation of iTunes into 3 apps, which has been on iOS for years, seemed to create an amazing outcry. I saw some very vitriolic conversations going on about it, and I think it's just that Apple's past its
and here's why, Dom. I think that it created that. iTunes had become a place to store all your audio, whether it's podcasts, voice memos, music, etc. It really worked well for that. And then of course it had the synchronization tool. What I found yesterday that I don't think was announced during during the keynote was that now syncing and backing up your phone is actually going to happen at the Finder level as opposed to in any application. So that part I think people were concerned about, because if you have a 256 gig iPhone and you have a 100 gig or 50 gig storage on iCloud, how do you sync your photos and that type of thing? But I think the bigger issue was people got used to having that one tool to store everything. And I also think they sort of felt like with this whole push with Apple Music to become the next Spotify, that those people who have libraries of content, I know, Eric, you probably have over 10,000 files, if I remember, audio files, if I remember correctly. I mean,
over 50,000,
yeah, people who have those, sort of want to know that they can go back to the Mac and listen to that content without being forced to be online.
You can synchronize that into your iMusic account or Apple Music account. That's what I've done, at least.
Yeah, you can. But the first version of it did a really good job of sort of hiding your library. They've now surfaced the library in the last 2 versions of the app. I think the pushback is Steve Jobs did a phenomenal job of saying digital hub for music, video, etc. That's what iTunes was. And it feels like that's being dismantled. I don't think the functionality is going away. I think the functionality is getting, sort of split into multiple locations.
So I'm going to have to say something a bit heretical, particularly given this particular program and this audience. But during that festival that I was DJing at a couple of weeks ago, I ran into a complexity with streaming, which is when you're in a field on the end of a very weak 3G signal, and you're streaming your music into your decks in front of a live audience. It's compromising when it takes longer to download a tune than it does to play one. It's really frustrating.
Welcome to where I live in Appalachia. That's sort of normal here.
But that does concern me. And I still have iTunes, so I had half my own personal library synced, and I ended up having to fall back onto that. But it's complicated because I take requests from the audience, and if I haven't got it, I rely on streaming feed into the decks. But a little bit of a challenge that I wasn't expecting.
All
I
right,
think that
go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest news to come out of WWDC though is that Apple thinks they can sell a $5,000 display now.
No, it's not a $5,000 display. It's a $6,000 display because it's $1,000 for the stand.
Right. Yeah, that's the even bigger news. Yeah, I buried the lead. Yeah,
But
$1,000 stand, but it makes it so you can turn it vertical. So
good news is if you put a really inefficient GPU on it, you can make it hot enough, lie it on its side, and use it as a cheese grill.
Yeah, do some fondue and raclette, perhaps. Yeah, that was strange because I get where they're going up against HP, and I've got a Z800 series workstation which mimicked the old Apple G5. And yes, it's more cost effective than that, but I almost wonder if it was one of those that they were putting out to show that they can do high end as well as low end. And if they're going to do high end, they might as well charge a premium price for every single part of it.
It'd be nice if they made a server, a rack mountable server. That would be quite interesting.
They're making a rack mountable version of this
Are they?
End of the year. Yeah. So essentially we're going back
cool.
to Xserve, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
The other piece of news I think that came out of that one was the whole, Apple TV, or sorry, tvOS. Dom, you had called this a couple episodes back, where one of the issues with Apple TV was the fact that you couldn't set up different profiles for different people, which meant your kids could get access to all the apps on there and watch content. They mentioned that in tvOS 13, they'll now actually have multiple profiles, so therefore you can hide apps.
Yeah.
I think that was really interesting, but I think they're fully embracing the future with cord cutting. Does anybody else have that general sense that Apple's now full on to saying cable's the past, cord cutting is the norm, and OTT is the way we should go forward in consuming content?
I also think that they're bet two horses, because it's both a gaming console as well as the video consumption console. And nobody knows exactly where it's going. It's really going gaming, or it's really going video, or both. And I think they're doing both, and they do this for a very specific reason.
So that's interesting, Mark. So if the Xbox was a gaming console that allowed you to do streaming, the Apple TV is a streaming console that allows you to do gaming.
Yes, exactly.
And why do you think that they're sort of pushing that device for gaming as well?
Again, I think because they see that's where the money goes. If you look at in the industry in general, if you look at the gaming industry revenues in total versus the Hollywood ones, gaming is way far more in terms of revenues in terms of industry than the Hollywood one, and they know this.
Okay. Hey, Marquis, so we talked a little bit before the top of the hour about the fact that I'd found an article in Hollywood Reporter that was saying that the average high-end gamer on Twitch makes about $15,000 an hour. You said you ran the numbers and came up with about half that amount, if I remember correctly. But even $700 an hour is a pretty astronomical figure for somebody just to sit and play video games. Or to Mark de Jong's point, is it that gaming is the new Hollywood?
I mean, I think to some extent, esports in general is the new hot property for sure. And I think you and I are probably talking about a couple different things. Maybe the Hollywood Reporter piece was talking about appearance fees. Is that possible for appearing at like a special event? That I could buy, that it's like $15,000 an hour.
Part of it was special events. Part of it was 3 million viewers on Twitch simultaneously. Was where the numbers were coming up.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And on average, some like the top streamers on Twitch are making, $700 to $800 an hour. And that's based on their annual revenue. So if you figure out that their annual revenues are $6 to $8 million a year, just based on Twitch revenue alone, just donations from your viewers on Twitch, that works out to almost $1,000 an hour.
Ninja was saying he makes roughly 10 million a year, so that would get him around the 1,100 range.
Right, but I'm talking about just Twitch revenue. He's
Got
talking about including endorsement fees, licensing deals,
Sponsoring,
all that.
whatever.
Right, exactly. I mean, he's got a deal with Red Bull now. He's got his own line of clothing now. He's got a TV, like an actual like a cable series coming out. It's
The only thing
yeah,
I'll say is they have to make their money.
shocking.
They're like footballers; they have to make their money really quickly because they're so fad. They're
Mhm.
underpinned by fad. You know, it's very rare you hear of a YouTuber lasting more than a few months. I think there's just so
It's
much option.
true. I think in the case of some of these guys who've made a huge name for themselves and who have kind of a fan community based around them, they'll be the old guard here in a few years, and they will, shift to a, having a different role in this
It's like
community.
Tony Hawk. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll be they'll be the wise, experienced old commentators and that sort of thing, as opposed to being active players. But they'll still be making $8 to $10 million a year, which is sickening in some ways. But
Get out of your bedroom and get a proper job.
And I mentioned Tony Hawk. I mean, he went from being a skateboarder to being an advisor on a skateboarding game. So ultimately,
right.
that there is that kind of model. Dom, you said we had another public comment before we
I
move on.
was just going to actually, before I post that public comment, I was just going to chip in that they've got a long way to go before they catch up the SMAF crew. We're obviously earning £100,000 an episode. So.
Oh yeah.
So Loki's back in on the chat room. I've got this new gadget which lets me post our chat questions directly into the stream, which you can see later, guys, when you watch it back on the YouTubes. But Loki's popped in the questions asking if there'd been any discussion of the new low latency HLS specification. Which was launched at the WWC, and actually, for what it's worth, I that was highlighted to me by one of the Apple crew yesterday. He was very excited about it. I took a cursory look myself at the developer pages, and it's Apple's CMAF.
So you're saying this is
not surprised about that one.
So AWS has launched their own ultra low latency chunked media format, which is CMAF. So I think there's a lot of people putting lipstick on pigs here. Mark, you're shaking your head. I'm glad you sympathise.
I mean, this is so typical for the industry in general, right? We finally get standards, and then we all find ways to get off standards again.
To differentiate,
it's not enough. We go back to standards. It's the same old story all the time.
And here's the thing, Mark. This standard is HLS is a de facto standard, full on. It never was a standard. And we all called out the problems of it, not from a scaling standpoint, but from a latency standpoint back when it first came out. Now, obviously, Apple learned a bit from smooth streaming and some of the other things, and they went to full fragmented MP4 as opposed to, doing the sort of pre-packaging. So we can have discussions about making HLS lower latency, but honestly, my take is just blow it up and go back and figure out a better way to get the MP4 files delivered. I'm a little biased because I wrote an article that will be coming out, Eric, is it July and August, on zero latency in the AV industry, where they're delivering a frame in 7 microseconds. That's what the latency is. Yeah. Where it's 16 milliseconds for a 4K 60 hertz frame, and they can actually push it in 7 microseconds after it's fully formed. But granted, they're doing it at data rates up in the 10G range.
I was going to say, you're going to need a lot of GOPS after that, a lot of iframes after that to actually make it.
And it's all iframes, Dom. Actually, they're not even doing groups
so
of
it's
pictures.
just NDI.
But it's NDI on a much higher resolution. But yeah, ultimately that's sort of the way that the model works.
Right.
But what's interesting there when we talk about innovation is they're learning how to deliver it at 0 frame latency. Then we can build on that kind of thing as we go forward to continue to compress better. So to me, there's sort of that extreme, and then there's the HLS extreme, which scales really well, but seems to be antithetical to any sort of model of low latency.
There's a big focus on, what's it? I've got to remember my numbers right. SMPTE 2022 for IP standardization, video over IP delivery and standardization. And I think, people are looking to squeeze latency out, but in a in a best effort network like the internet, there's only so far you can take it before you start having to trade off the quality.
And we have to go back to the use case. Is it always needed?
Yeah.
Sure.
To be that the latency that minimal. Yes, there are applications where yes, but there are also a lot of applications where it doesn't make sense.
My personal assumption at the moment is the gambling industry, which specifically needs that ultra low latency, will go WebRTC for the next 12 months to 24 months. Maybe something will pop in out of nowhere, and that's working for CDNs that are thinking edge compute, because they can deal with these niche session-based protocols deep at the edge of their networks. For those that are just using Varnish, they're I was going to say something rude there, but they're stuffed. They're going to have to do CMAF to get
the other
anything
model
like low latency.
is command and control. Obviously, for anything where you need very low latencies, those models are there. I agree on the use cases, Mark. As a matter of fact, some of the companies that I talk to even in that space where I'm talking about 0 frame latency are building boxes that will take those codecs and convert them over to HEVC to push out for the people who don't need it, in less than half a second.
Yeah.
So the models are there, but I think it sort of begs that whole: have we innovated HLS to the point where it no longer is HLS? It's back to looking more like RTMP or something like that, in terms of the
old school, back to old school stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Millions of progressive downloads.
There we go. All right. Hey, Dom, my battery is complaining that it's about dead, so I'm going to step away for a second. I think the next topic we had on here was cord cutting.
Well, that's always a meaty one. That's a good one to leave us with.
Yeah.
Let's see if
so
we can
you
find
do
your
that
picture.
while I go off and get my charger real quick.
So there was one of the articles that we posted last month is global OTT revenues to grow to 72.8 billion in the US by 2023. I'm hearing a lot of crazy figures around not just OTT, but right across the sector at the moment. That it gives me the impression that every single streaming viewer is spending about £1,000 a week on streaming at the moment, if you actually sort of work out the populations and these target audiences and these. But what do you guys, as a whole, what do you guys think about those sort of numbers? So just to repeat, that was 72.8 billion by 2023, and we're on.
I think a lot of people are taking more than one subscription, and that's why you see these numbers that seem really, really high. I know it's the case in the US, but even in France, which isn't one of the biggest, OTT countries, I know a ton of people who've got more than one subscription.
Do you think that's going to continue though, or do you think we're still in a phase where people are sort of testing the waters and having multiple concurrent subscriptions, but ultimately within the next 6 months to a year are going to say, no, these are the 2 that I need, or these are the 2 I really want?
Yeah, I think that people are going to keep, as long as you can only find certain content with certain providers, people are going to keep on going where the content is. So if you need to have 2 or 3 different subscriptions to get the shows that you want, then that's what people are going to do.
Well, and everybody joked, I guess, a little less than a month ago, the Monday after the Game of Thrones finale, wondering how many people, canceled their HBO Go and HBO Now subscriptions, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I guess I'm not quite as confident as you are, but like you said, as long as services like HBO or Disney have this marquee content that everyone feels they have to watch, I think you're right. It's going to continue to a degree.
I think there's some.
Anyone else thoughts on that?
I think there's some revenue challenges in the sector as a whole at the moment. I think the subscriber revenue services have probably got more sustainability, but I think ad-based services are going to struggle over the next few years, just because there's so much competition, and I don't think any ad-driven services, with the possible obvious behemoth of YouTube, but I don't think any of the free-to-air channels that are being made available at the moment, and I don't think they're sustainable, not only from the core technical delivery model, but I don't think they're sustainable from the amount of money they're getting from advertising in terms of the creativity that they need, the money they need to push into the production and the creatives to create content that's worth watching that will drive that ad revenue. So if I was running an ad-based model at the moment, I'd be seriously thinking about looking at how I'm going to drive a subscriber-based model off the side of it.
Do you
Yeah,
think there's?
go on.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, yeah. So a big difference, I think, is, I mean, if you look at video advertising in general, it was pretty much targeted, and that's where they got more money than the regular normal ones.
Yeah.
But if everything is targeted, pricing will go down for targeted advertising in general, and then everybody will hit a ground somewhere where it doesn't make sense to keep the ad model in.
Yeah. Mark,
And also, I think right now we're looking at a landscape where SVOD is still king. But as we reach this kind of critical point of having so many SVOD services and having the average consumer having 2 or 3 different SVOD, contracts, SVOD subscriptions, isn't it possible that within the next couple of years we're going to see a shift towards AVOD services and more advanced AVOD services with original content on them? And at that point, isn't it possible that these AVOD services would have such an influx of cash that they would be able to compete on the content plane? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm skeptical about that, just because I know that younger kids today, lots of them have never seen ads, and and they're really used to being able to watch anything they want on demand and not have to worry about advertising. I know my own son, the first time he saw TV, and he's 9 right now, but when he saw an ad, he got pissed off. I mean, he was angry because he was wondering why his show was being stopped.
I'd absolutely second that. I've cited exactly the same experience myself with my boy. He was just surprised at an interstitial advert. What the hell's going on? So there's a culture. There's going to be a cultural push. But is that the same in the States, guys? Because in the States, we've had conversations about this before, but certainly until Netflix, you guys had no concept of a world without adverts.
Yeah, I mean, right. Except for public television.
And every premium cable network.
Yeah, that's true.
Since the
All right,
70s,
well, certainly
been
the
a while.
cable networks over here, you pay for your subscription, but you still get every bit as much advertising as you do on a commercial broadcast.
Well, and
Sky
Dom,
and
even
Virgin are flooded with adverts. All their content channels are flooded.
I was going to say, even 12, 13 years ago, my youngest, we had cord cut probably 14 years ago, and we did DVDs for a while before streaming kicked in. And the first time she saw TV with a commercial, she picked up the remote to fast forward it. And I had to explain to her that that's not how it worked. And I wasn't going to explain TiVo to her. But ultimately with live TV, that's always been the model here in the States, is it's advertising driven.
Right. Yes.
Now, of course, if a kid watches a lot of YouTube, even if you got YouTube Red or YouTube Premium, whatever they're calling it these days, they are, of course, still getting ads, right? Because so much of the content that kids watch is essentially branded content, where they're getting ads in a different way, so that's been sort of the challenge that I found as a parent, is trying to encourage my 10-year-old, especially, who watches a ton of YouTube, to be critical of what he's watching and understand that that his YouTubers are being sponsored by Lego or being sponsored by the various video game companies, and at least be aware of that. So it's a different world.
So something that contrasts with that, though, that's interesting, is that there was another post we dropped out on SMAF, which I'm just going to try and bring up for the online audience. Basically, the US podcast ad revenues hit 479 million in 2018, so they're up 53% in the last year, strongly aided by the rapid uptake of smart speakers over the last 12 months and so on. But it is interesting that number seems a lot more sane to me, and also I think that the value of advertising to radio listeners, I'd imagine that a disproportionate number of them are streaming in CarPlay or in cars as they travel, and that's a very targeted, locked-in place to advertise. So I'd imagine the value of that advertising is probably pretty good and probably quite sustainable as well. So I think the ad world, I think the audio world has got some legs in this, but I think the freemium video world has got some economic challenges. That's my gut feeling, at least. Has left you all stone cold silent.
So Tim is still searching for his battery, I guess.
So how many?
Funny,
So in terms of subscriptions in your houses, we've got Prime and Netflix here, and my ISP service. What are you guys running domestically?
I've got Prime, Netflix, Hulu's live service, our ISP, of course, the YouTube Premium. But I'm still living in a world where those were once all tax deductible because they were job related. So I guess they're not anymore in the new era.
Yeah. It's research, honestly.
Right.
Excellent.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah.
Mark East.
Prime, Netflix, and HBO Go.
Anyone else?
And I barely watch those.
Anyone else? Tim,
I wish I had time.
Stacie, what are you guys running at home?
We've also got Prime and Netflix at home, and then I've also got a son who watches a ton of YouTube. Legos on YouTube.
Excellent. Mark, Tim?
I actually just regular IPTV and YouTube. I specifically don't have Netflix to avoid any binge watching.
That's probably very wise, actually.
It's funny that you say that, Mark, because I had YouTube I had Netflix when I was married, and in the last couple of years, I found myself trying to actively force myself not to binge watch, so I don't have Netflix either. I do have Prime just inherently because I've got Amazon Prime.
Yeah, then you get it for free, right? Yeah.
But I tend to go, I tend to watch movie trailers on my Apple TV to decide if I want to actually go watch a movie.
All right.
Funny. Yeah.
How about music services, actually, just as a sort of, this straw poll's going on. So I'm running Spotify, just Spotify, and it does everything for me. And then I buy the odd tune, traditionally off iTunes, and that may change or off Beatport. But you guys subscribe to any music services?
Apple Music.
Apple Music.
And of course, let's not forget Tidal, my customer Tidal.
All right.
They're good for some things.
In
fact, we got a brand new Prince album coming out this month, which is very, very exciting.
We talked about exclusive content, right? We talked about how if you want to watch Game of Thrones, you've got to subscribe to HBO. Spotify and Apple Music, I subscribe to both of those. They both got their occasional exclusives that for a month you can get or a week you can get the Taylor Swift album only on Apple Music. But that's really, that's really the differentiating factor for Tidal, isn't it, Mark? In that they've got a lot more exclusive content. And with huge names. Beyonce. They've got all this Prince content now that has got me tempted to subscribe again.
Yeah, they've stuck with that exclusivity model, and it's paid off for them. I think you could probably chalk up half of their subscriber base to that alone. That and their original content library too. They're creating content. That's what we do for them. Is all these live concerts. They're building a very robust library of live concert content that will only be available on Tidal forever. So.
And Eric, I think you answered your question about whether people will settle down to a single streaming, video streaming subscription. Ultimately, I think this is the kind of thing in the music industry that's playing out into the movie and premium content industry as well. So I suspect we're going to have 2 or 3, audio streaming services and 2 or 3 video streaming services. I think there is a market opportunity for somebody to come in and aggregate those together in a bundle and then sell you a bundle at a reduced rate. But whether or not each of those OTT providers will allow that, I guess, remains to be seen. I think we'll get that at least in the next 18 months.
Mark East, I've got a question that you may or may not be able to answer. Earlier, you brought up the issue regarding the Nordic collaboration proposal. asking whether or not these services are going to differentiate themselves with HDR and 4K. Back to music, I know that one of the ways that Tidal has tried to differentiate itself is that they offer higher quality audio than Apple Music or Spotify, or at least that was one of their pitches at the beginning. Has that turned out to be a differentiator?
It was to your point, it was a differentiator in the beginning. I think everyone else is caught up at this point. Apple Music and Spotify virtually offer the same quality as Tidal.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. What was the Neil Young's service called? What was that? Yeah, the lossless.
A week and a half, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think competing on quality. I mean, when the human ear is unable to discern the difference, then why does it matter? You know what I mean? Unless you're doing a tremendous job of marketing.
Good enough is good enough. Good enough. Right. And traditionally, what we do now is we have a little quiz on what you guys are up to over the next month, and what you think is going to happen in the industry over the next 12 months. So I'm just going to go left to right across my my little icons of faces that I've got here. So starting with you, Eric, what are you up to over the next month, and what do you think? What's your big industry prediction at the moment over the next 12 months?
Well, we are beginning to program Streaming Media West, which will be happening in November. It's moving from Huntington Beach to downtown Los Angeles. As much as I'm going to miss the Hyatt Regency on the beach, I think it's a good move in terms of access for people in the greater Los Angeles area. And getting to Mark East's point earlier about how esports is the hot property of the moment, we're adding an esports and sports streaming summit there. So there will be a track focused exclusively on esports and traditional sports, and how those two worlds are both diverging and converging. So that's going to be the primary area of my focus in the next month or so. And as for industry trends, I think, esports is one that I'm focused on, and we're only going to see continued growth there.
Perfect. Mark, DJ, what do you think? What are you up to over the next month, and what's your big industry prediction for the next 12 months from the vantage point of June in 2019?
Well, for next month, at least in terms of events, there's not much. Well, you won't see me, at least.
I know, I'm going to miss you.
So nothing happening there. As for industry trends, I think, even though it's still highly debatable, peer-to-peer streaming, especially with the announcement of P2P SRT, as we talked over before, can be a very interesting one, and we should surely keep an eye on that one.
Something disruptive in the network. Interesting.
Yes.
Mark, your next, what are you up to over the next month, and the next 12-month prediction for the big industry theme? Go for it.
Gosh, I don't know about the prediction part, but over the next few weeks, we've got a bunch of events happening for E3, which is going to be an exciting show this year. Should be interesting because Sony's not present this year for the first time in many, so it'll be interesting to see how other players take advantage of that space.
Interesting.
And then we're gearing up for San Diego Comic-Con in July for Marvel and a few other events surrounding that. So
is that work or recreation? Be honest.
Oh no, it's work. And unfortunately, I won't leave the Marvel booth the entire time. It'll be good. I mean, I would concur with Eric in that esports is kind of driving the most exciting things in live streaming, at least. Especially for us, we still do quite a bit of esports stuff, and it's interesting to see some of the moves. I don't know if you heard about the commissioner for the Overwatch League leaving Blizzard for Epic, so that points to the advent of a Fortnite league or some sort of professional Fortnite platform. So it should be interesting to see what they do there. They also own Rocket League, which is another massive esports title. So they seem to be putting some players in place to go to the next level there. So hopefully we can do some work with them as well.
Fantastic. And Stacie, how about you? What's your next month got lined up, and what's your big prediction for the next 12 months?
Sure. Yeah. The next month is actually pretty busy. We're participating and organizing 4 different events between now and mid-June. So they're all local, but it's still going to be very, very busy. So lots of fun. And yeah, on a prediction side, I'm not too sure. I'm still really interested in all of the dynamic ad insertion. So yeah, I'm not really sure how that's going to pan out. What's going to happen with that. But yeah, I'm interested to watch and see what happens.
Perfect. And Tim, how about you? No, you've just reappeared back on the video lines. What's your next month got in, and
I did.
what's your 12-month prediction at this point?
So Infocom is the next trade show I'm going to, and that's actually at the end of next week. That's the companies who do AV integration. So, fully lossless 4K 60 delivery at the 7 microsecond that I was talking about earlier. My prediction in the next year is that we'll finally acknowledge that HLS is not what we need from a latency standpoint, and the industry will begin in earnest to try to figure out whether something like ATSC 3.0 or HBB-TV, the IP multicast that the broadcasters are using, will actually be beneficial in the streaming space. And what about you, Dom?
So I've got the next month is I'm away for a month from the middle of July, so I've just got the end of year to do, basically finish up stuff and make sure I've got a nice queue of articles to write for Eric while I travel. So that's my plan there. Industry-wise, I think from my point of view, I'm watching out for the CDNs getting their edge compute strategy together, because I think that predicates deploying things like WebRTC more prevalently, and I think that in turn will then lead to some disruption in the overall delivery chain and how people are preparing content, thinking about planning, especially for live streaming. So it's really, the Fastly float last month, I was closely focused on what their edge compute really means. I differ from them in how they define edge computing. I don't think deploying an HTTP proxy counts as edge computing. I have a very different picture of it. So maybe they'll spend some of their newly earned dollars on that, and that'll be disruptive across the big CDN space, if nothing else. So with that, we've hit the hour, guys, and it's been a joy to have you. Actually, just one last little mention, just something for your diaries. Next February, so get this in your diary early. We'd like to be organised on SMAF. Next February, none of us are going to be here. You're going to be entirely hosted by the Women in Streaming Media Group. So maybe, Stacie, you want to get across Peggy and the crew to get involved in that, because the SMAF in February falls on International Women's Day, so we're having a ladies' takeover day. So get that one in your diary. That's going to be good fun. So yeah, with that, I think we need to say a massive thank you to our guests this month. Stacie, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to
it. Was fun.
Brilliant. And Mark, I look forward to seeing you at the inevitable conferences, my alternative wife. Thank you very much for taking the abuse. It's been brilliant. Cool. And Mark, enjoy Marvel and all the wonderful things you do with them, and whoever else you're doing your hundreds of gigs with. Eric, best of luck with all your programming and streaming media west things and so on. And I will be chatting to you in the next day or so anyway, because I've got little things to chat with you about. And finally, Tim, you look like you're on a blue screen. Have you still got video, or are you pedaling hard to recharge your...
No, I've got audio. It unfortunately, I couldn't move the charger in front of the map of the world. So
there we go.
I missed Eric's warning at the beginning to make sure my device was charged. That warning was to his daughter, not to me, but I should have paid attention as well.
So anyone watching who's considering sponsoring SMAF, Tim needs a new long charger cable. Cool.
With that, we're done.
And with that, we're done. Absolutely. Let's see if we can press the right tags, and we'll see you next month.